Now, of course, we all know that with so much content, it's very difficult to navigate it all and to make sense of it. So for a lot of organizations, what they'll do here is they'll dig in and actually create really compelling experiences for seeing and consuming that information.
2Lead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace?
Out of the box, you could do this with SharePoint. If you were in SharePoint Online and you would look at actually something called Microsoft.lookbooks.com, you can see real world examples of designs for how you might build your own SharePoint intranet. And this is very common. This design model is very common. You see here, these are all, this is called a hero spotlight, but these are all essentially news controls. News, 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 news down here, more news and more news. And then there's actually more. I cut it off. So think about this from a design perspective. I'm an end user and I'm trying to consume news, information within my organization, a very common element of an effective intranet. When I do that, I have to scroll. This is where the page fold is. I have to scroll and scroll and scroll. And this is what happens when you use SharePoint out of the box web parts. They're great because you can target them, you can have different styles and designs, but they really don't start to scale when you start to think of best use of real estate, and they certainly could be better from an experience and usability perspective. And remember, we want to simplify things. We don't want people to have to navigate to multiple pages or to have to scroll up and down a ton just to consume the key information they need. That homepage design is very important. So here's an example of a custom, but a very common one we've done for many customers. This is just one of, like, I think we've implemented, we did a count internally a little while ago, 60 plus of these, like these sort of activity feed concepts. And so in organizations, it's very common that instead of having, you know, news, events, all these web parts on a page, that you can roll it up into one sort of cohesive space. This is sort of a stream or a feed for the activity. And here you can see in this particular one, what we've done is some very simple actions. Let me just walk through a few of them. One of the things that we've done is we've made it clear for the categories. Now you could even make this clear to read. This design is actually a little too difficult to read some of these words, but you can make that, you know, a color specific thing for each category as an example. You can also see that each of these news articles, you can do different color highlighting. So we actually see this in real world. We have customers where a business unit within the organization is red and another business unit is blue. And so when we roll up the news, we can actually use these kinds of techniques to stylize the news. So it's at a glance, you know, oh, this is, you know, from this organizational unit, this is from that organizational unit, or this region, that region. It's a very common thing that we've done for many organizations. Another thing that's really great about this is out of the box, unfortunately, if we, let me just go back so you can see it, it's hard to see, but it says one view. So it has a little bit of insight about what's going on with these articles and news items, but it's very limited. Whereas if we build this ourselves, right, which again is not a very challenging thing to do, we can add things like the number of comments or the number of views or the number of likes. And this is really important. I'll use the example of comments. Comments are really important because I may have already read this article, but now that I see that the comment count has increased, I might re-engage with that article because I'm interested in the topic. You know, it was 10 comments or 0 comments before. Now I see 40 comments. Wow, I really want to go check out what people are talking about. And so this is creating greater engagement, which is great. It's also extremely helpful because that greater engagement leads to more cross-pollination of ideas, feedback, and so on and so forth. You'll also see concepts like bookmarking. This is actually out of the box. If you were to go to the actual page in the out-of-the-box experience for news, you can sort of save it for later. Why not bring that directly into the experience here? So it's very easy to say, oh, I want to read that. I just don't have time right now. Let me save it for later. These are not things that we're building ourselves. They're already in the platform. All we're building is the interface that allows you to have these experiences. So this is a great example. Of course, there's filtering and other concepts. So you're not losing anything with the broader page, but doing this can make a significant difference in making the consumption of events and news and spotlights and all that other information much, much easier to consume. So this is something that we highly, highly recommend organizations do. And whether it looks like this or variations of it is highly dependent on what you prefer. Now, there's another great example of this within the LiveTiles product suite. So if you implement with LiveTiles as a third-party ecosystem option, they actually have a lot of the same capabilities here. In fact, arguably it's better in some ways, right? Because it has the same idea of clear categories, right? We can see cafeteria menu as a category, news from HR. We also have likes and comments and things like that. But you actually have this unique thing that they've developed, which is this read. You know, have you read it before? Marked as read, unread, those kinds of concepts. So really, really capable features that make the consumption of this much greater, better experience. So these are just a few examples. Whether you build it from scratch, whether you use like source code like ours, which by the way is free if you work with us, or whether you use companies like LiveTiles, the reality is there's ways to improve and uplift our design. Don't just settle for out of the box, and don't settle for like a really simple news control that doesn't have even suggestions like how long it takes to read the document, etc. There's lots of ways that you can really improve this with very minor effort. All right, so that's some examples of essentially simplifying and improving the roll-up design. Now there's many more if we had time to go through, but for the sake of time, I have to keep going along here. Today's session is going to be about what makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace. We're going to be covering a lot today, so if you haven't heard me or seen me present before, be ready for a pretty brisk pace, kind of drinking from the fire hose. Today, if you have any questions, you can ask them within the webinar itself in Microsoft Teams. Alternatively, you can always send an email or reach out and we can have a one-on-one discussion, because of course these kinds of sessions are great, but they're not very prescriptive because I can't understand exactly your current state, whereas if we had a one-on-one call, we could dig in a little bit deeper. In addition to that, I do want to highlight that the slides are available on SlideShare right now, and there will be a recording of this webinar available. And if you're one of the people who are listening to the recording, thanks for giving me some time today. So with that,